G'day, welcome back to my workroom. I'm Lisa Payne. Today's tutorial I'm going to be teaching you how to make this cute little sleeping kitty. He's made of felt and he's even got his little cat bed as well. You can make him as well if you like. You can download the free pattern. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below, print out your pattern pieces and we'll get started. So now we're going to start with making our little kitty. You should have your two body pieces cut out one and one reversed. You should have fusible interfacing applied. I always use a woven fusible interfacing. It just means that you've got greater flexibility when you're making anything like this where you've got some lovely curves. And you'll need your two head pieces. You'll need your little muzzle piece, a couple of little ear pieces there, and a tiny little scrap of pink for the nose. We're going to be stitching over that, but you just need a tiny scrap. And also I've put in the templates to make yourself just a sweet little cat cushion there as well. So the first thing we're going to do, you also need a button there for the underneath. That's how we're going to pop his little button head on. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I very quickly put in some little stripes. Now obviously you're going to choose whatever colour felts you want to make up your little kitty. I just find it easier to machine stitch some little indications of stripes on here, and we do that first up on the machine, so we'll get that done. So now to sew our little stripes in here, I've actually threaded up in black on my machine. I've set my stitch to a wide zigzag and I have my stitch length on about 1.5. I want it quite close together. Now there's no real rules with this. We're just going to make an impression of some little stripes. I start on the edge and we're just going to come in a little way. And then I'm just going to hit reverse and go straight back over that. That stitching I've just done. You can see there I've just made a little stripe. So quite randomly I'm going to keep going and make those little stripes all the way around the body, all the way around, even down the bottom in this little tail section here. Just leave a tip at the end. And all of our threads, of course, they're going to be hidden when we put our little body together. So I'll get you to go all the way around and then we'll come back. So there is our little body piece with our stripes all sewn in. You can see how I've just gone around, rotated as I've done it, and I've really just made a circle around the outside. Right, so our next step is we're going to join our body pieces together. So with right sides together, I've left a little opening on the back curve there. Right there, it's probably around about 4 centimetres, 5 centimetres. I'm going to pin these two body pieces together all the way around, and then I'm just going to sew a seam on the machine from here all the way around to here and leaving this section open for turning and filling. The seam width is quite small, really tiny, around about 3 to 4 mil. And when you're sewing around this little junction here, just perhaps go back and forth a little so you make that little area really strong. So we'll do that. So there's our little two body pieces sewn together. I'm just going to pop my knitting needle in there to push those seams out. Get it right down into the curve there where his little tail is. We need that pushed right out. And if you've done any of my projects before, you know that I always get you to roll your seams out between your thumb and forefingers, and that gives you a nice rounded curve there. So all the way around. Okay, now in your downloaded pattern pieces, you'll find a little piece that it wasn't for cutting out, it was actually just to be used as a guide. It will be called a tail guide, and it's just to help you to line up to be able to sew that seam that we've done there, like I've sewn on this little one, to give that indication of a little tail. So I'm just trying to make it a bit easier for you, and what I'm going to do is get you to line that up along the bottom, match it up with the end there of the tail and along the bottom edge, and I'm just going to use a permanent marker, and I'm just going to very lightly mark that in. So it's really just enough so that you can see when you're sewing it on the machine, you'll be able to follow that line. Make sure that you get right to the edge and just stop right at the end there. Doesn't need to be very dark. Right, so from there you choose a thread to match your body colour, and I like to pop a pin in just to hold those two layers together before I machine it. And what you're going to do, like I have on that one, is I'm going to machine sew that little seam. Now there's our little seam sewn. I've actually started here on my machine, stitched out to the edge and reversed and come back. That's given me a nice double seam there, and it's left that edge really nice and tidy. You do need that to be quite firm, because now we're going to fill that little tail section just with our polyester filling. I like to use forceps for filling areas like this. You can use chopsticks, they tend to have that little textured end which helps hold on to the stuffing. But we really do want to get that packed in quite firm. So just taking small pieces and getting that down in there. So we're going to fill that whole tail section, and as I do that you can see that that's creating that sort of little illusion that we've got a little separated tail there that's tucked up. You can see that happening there. So all you need to do is fill the rest of the body. Make sure this section here is filled out nice and firm. If I give you a little idea, you can see that's quite firm and quite springy there. So fill up your whole tail section and the rest of your body right up until the opening there. So here's our little kitty body all filled out now. You can see that I filled it right up. You should have some stuffing right there on the edge. You can see it's really packed in there. Next thing we do, of course, is we've got to close that opening. Now this can be a bit daunting. Most people find this a little bit daunting, and practice does make perfect, certainly. After you've done a few of these closing, you'll be a pro. Now I do have, this is called a ladder stitch that we use to close openings in any kind of 3D professional toy making and teddy bear making. We use a ladder stitch to close the opening. I'm using a normal size needle. I'm using an extra strong upholstery thread in a colour that matches my fabric. If in doubt, go darker with the thread when you're closing an opening. It just works better, it's more invisible. So we start with a very, very big knot in our thread. In fact, there's probably 6 knots there. I don't want that to pull through. I'm going to go back in that hole. That's why I need it to be quite substantial. I'm going to show you a couple of stitches here on this project, but if you're unsure of this stitch, I have a full video that shows you how to do this stitch really up close, so you can have a look at that. That's on my channel called Lisa Pay, and it is called How to Do a Ladder Stitch. So just look that up if you really want to sit there and have a few practices first. But I'll show you the basics here. So we've just come in under. I always like to put my thumb in there. It just keeps all the stuffing out of the way. Pop your needle straight in right next to where your seam ended. And then we're going to go across to the other side and completely mirror that. And then we're going to travel down just the length of a stitch, probably 3 mil, and pull that through. And you get this little stitch going across like this. Put my thumb back through. And now we're going to go back into that same hole. So back into that same hole where we first started, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to travel down just a little way, Little stitches will knit it together nicely. If stitches are too big, you get puckering and so on. And you can see that stitch has come across. When I pull that in, it's starting to close that seam. And you can see it ends up being quite neat and actually quite invisible. The more of them you do, the more comfortable you'll feel. So it's just crisscrossing, back and forth, and squeezing and pulling in as you go. Like I said, have a look at my other video if you're unsure, and you'll have no problem. So I'm just going to sew that seam that way all the way to the end till that little opening is closed. There's our little body opening closed. All good. So we've got our little headless kitty there, which is a bit disturbing really, isn't it? So what we might do is make him a head. So we'll just pop that one there out of the way. So now we need one of our head pieces, and we begin by taking our muzzle piece, which has our fusible webbing applied. So we peel our paper off, and you're going to fuse. We're using a hot iron, a very hot iron, and a protective cloth. Going to fuse your little muzzle piece straight onto the face there. Take your time to position it. Remember also that we're going to be sewing a small seam to sew the bottom half of the head together. So you need enough room for the seam, and you want to have a little bit of room between the seam and the muzzle piece. So just having a look there, there's probably around about 5 millimeters from the top of the head there. So you just fuse that one on. Also your little ear pieces, peel the paper off, and they sit just here on the lower side, so this area is thicker. And remember too that you want some room for sewing, so make sure there's enough room there. You might want to pull them down a little. So take your time to position them well, fuse those on, and then we'll get sewing. There's a little muzzle and ear pieces fused on. Now you've got two options here for sewing them on. I like doing a blanket applique stitch, which is this one. But if you want to speed up the process, or perhaps you just don't really enjoy the hand stitching, if you're very good on your machine, you could just sew a machine stitch around those pattern pieces if you like, and that'll hold it on well. I like doing that hand sewing, so I always opt to do the blanket applique stitch. Come in from behind. When I'm doing this stitch, I like to use either 2 strands of embroidery thread or an upholstery thread, which is what I tend to use the most because it's nice and fine and it's still very strong. So I've just come in from behind, come out right on that edge there, and we're going to make tiny little stitches, really small, about 2 mil. Come out again, and we're going to work that little buttonhole stitch all the way around. If you're not familiar with this stitch, I do have on my other channel, Lisa Pay. You can look that up, and there is a tutorial on how to do this stitch, and it is called How to Sew Blanket Applique or Buttonhole Stitch. And you can see I'm just going to work all the way around that little pattern piece, which of course takes a little longer than machine sewing, but you can choose either. So I'm going to do this one just in that nice off-white colour. You can see that coming. I'll go all the way around, and then I'll be using just a deeper pink to sew on the ears. So now I've sewn all the way around my little muzzle piece. I have opted to show you that machine stitching in the pink, so you can see, so long as it's a nice and neat tidy finish, that's what we're after. I've also fused that little nose piece on in position there, and I'm going to show you how to just stitch over. We actually use that as a guide, as a template. Generally when we stitch a teddy bear's nose professionally, we do a very neat close together satin stitch. On this little guy, I've really just wanted to indicate that there's a deeper colour over the top. So I have, again, you can use 2 strands of embroidery thread, or this time am using my upholstery thread, but I actually have it doubled. And we're going to start from the back. We've got a knot in the end, and we're going to start at the back, and we're going to aim to come out right at the very base of the nose there. We always start in the middle. It just allows us to make both sides even. So right in the centre and come out, and really all we want to do is just cover that little nose with a little embroidery sort of satin stitch. When you're placing your stitches, just make sure they're not twisted or crossed over. It just gives you a better look. Right on the edge again. Pull those nice and firm. Check that it's nice and straight. Don't pull it so hard that it distorts the shape of the nose, but just so that it's firm. And then we'll work from this side, and we'll cover this side, and then we'll come across and we'll cover this side. So our next stitch will come in down the bottom again, and as I said, don't be too concerned about it being perfect coverage on this little project. It's really just about giving it a bit of extra colour. So again, we're going to lay our stitches nice and flat and pop our needle close to the other one. And you can see that we're going to cover that all the way, change over and cover that side until we get that sort of result here. So I'll just finish that one up. So you can see I've just covered that little nose just enough so it looks nice. Now we do sew in a little mouth and his eyes, but we actually do that after his head is stuffed and put together. So I'm going to show you how we do that now. We need our other headpiece. If you're unsure about the eye placement there, you can mark that in now, and you can mark it in using your ruler so that you're getting your positions correct. It really is, you just need to see that they just sit in just on the curve either side of that little muzzle, and they're just straight across. The reason why we stitch them later is so that we get that nice closed eyelid sort of look. We get a bit of volume there. The measurement, if you want to draw your little lines in previous to putting the head together, the measurement is 12 millimeters. So it's a 12 millimeter, and you can just, if you want to just pop in a little marker there and a little marker there, you can, that's up to you. Otherwise, we're going to pop our head together. So just with your other headpiece, it's just right sides together. We're going to pin and sew from the base of the ear right around the chin line to about the base of the ear. I like to sew with a little overcasting stitch first before I sew it on the machine, just so that I get it really neat and it doesn't move. So just a matter of pinning from ear base to ear base and sewing it on your machine. So here's our little chin seam sewn. We're just going to turn that through. Let's use my knitting needle again to really push that seam out. Again, rolling out between your fingers and thumbs. You can see I've marked in my little eye positions there. Have a good look at where that is. And now all we need to do is just add just a little bit of filling. The head isn't really filled firmly, it's just enough to plump it out a little and give us a little bit of that volume for just needle sculpting our little closed eyes in, so it's just a matter of tucking it in there and holding it down with your other hand. We need to try and keep it in place. Let's have a look at this one. You can see how much filling is in there, and that is fairly soft up here because we're going to just join our ears together. I'm going to use craft glue just to glue the top of the ears together here and here. It's going to seal it together and hold it for us, so that when we can close it with that blanket stitch, and we're not worried about everything falling out while we're doing it. So I generally just, my craft glue dries very quickly, and it just remains a little bit flexible, which is what we need. So perhaps not all the way to the base, just enough to hold that ear. You don't want to be sewing through layers and layers of glue. Tuck that filling in and just pinch that one closed. You do the same with that side there. I often use little alligator clips to hold that closed while it dries. Give it about 5 or 10 minutes to dry. Glue up the other side, and then we'll make that stitch. Now our little ear pieces are dry. I'm going to start sewing that lattice stitch, that blanket stitch around the outside. You can come in at the back of the head. That's where we're going to be joining the head to the body, so you can actually come in at the back of the head and just let that knot sit there because it won't be seen. Where we want to come out is right between the two pieces of felt, right on the edge there, where the seam begins. I'm using a Pearl A thread this time. I actually like that top, when I'm closing the top of an animal's head like that, I like to use a heavier stitch because we've got raw edges and it gives you more coverage. So we're just going to start that stitch. It's just a normal blanket stitch. Stitches is very close together, again probably about 3 millimeters, and we've gone through, come back out through the loop to create that little binding stitch, and we'll work that stitch all the way around the outside. Once you've glued your little kitty's head together, if you want to trim up your edges here, if you've got any raw edges showing, you can trim that up before you start this stitch. That would be the time to do that. And we're just going to sew those edges together. You can see that creating that nice little binding, and we're going to work all the way across to the other ear, just like this one. So there's our little blanket stitch, all done. Now I have threaded up my needle with a single strand of black Pearl A thread. Again, you can use embroidery thread, in this case probably 3 strands of embroidery thread, because we're going to just sew in the little eyes, the little closed eyes and the little mouth. So we start with a knot at the end of our thread and we come in from behind. Start in the centre, and there's your little mark that you made before. We're going to come out right on that mark. And then we're going to go back in and aim our needle back towards the centre at the back. And as we do that, I'm just going to encourage that little stitch to pull in. create some nice little bounce through there. We're going to go back in again, still holding that quite firm. Go back in again, and we're going to come out right on the same dot on the other side. Just keep that tension up on your other stitch, pulling that in, and then we're going to go back again and again come out the middle of the head. That just helps pull that stitch in and give you that nice little bit of a puckered look. So we get that look. Now you can move your felt around and your stuffing around to adjust the way that that looks. You want your tension to be just right. You look, you've got him looking nice and sleepy. Hit both sides. And keeping that tension up, then you'll want to anchor that stitch. So remembering that we're not going to see any of this work from behind because this is how the head is attached to the body. You can actually be quite strong with your stitching there because we want that tension to stay put in those little eyes. So I've done about 3 stitches there, and it's kept that tension up, so they're nicely pulled in, and they're going to stay that way. You can see that. Now, because I've left myself plenty of thread, rather than casting off, it's probably easier for me just to dive back into that head, and we're going to make our little mouth. Where we want to come out is just a little way below the nose, straight down from the centre. That's where we're aiming for our needle to come out. Probably just about here, so we need a little bit of a straight stitch first. And getting that right is worth taking your time with. Make sure that it's straight and aligned. Remember that when you pull these stitches up too, of course they shorten slightly. So that's looking about right. So we're going to come through, and we can pull that quite firm now. We don't have to worry about these stitches sinking any deeper because we've anchored them at the back. So now we're going to go straight back in to make our straight stitch, and we have to estimate where the corner of our mouth is going to start. So that's just about popping your needle in. There is a little trick that you can do where you can wrap the thread around, and that can give you a bit of an idea, and you can think, yep, that's pretty good, or I could move it up, or I could move it down. But that probably looks about right to me. Might just bring him down a fraction. And we'll push that needle through. So that gives us our little straight stitch. Now you see we've come out here. So our next step, because we want to make that effect, we're actually going to use that stitch, and we're not going to go into the fabric, we're just going to slide our needle behind it, because that will anchor our little mouth perfectly, and we'll be able to pull it down and match it up on the other side. And it all comes together and it's nice and even. It does tend to sit that stitch down just nice and firm. So we need to match that up on the opposite side. And again, remember, once you pull it in, those stitches tend to come up a little and be a little bit shorter, so just overestimate that a little. And I'm thinking that looks about right. Come out again at the back. And there we've got our little stitched mouth there. And you can just finish that off at the back as you did before. And you can knot and snip that one off. So our next step is to attach our head to our body, which is done with a button through the back. You want to establish exactly where you want your head to be attached. So we're using upholstery thread again. I've doubled it this time, no need for a knot in the end because of the way that we're going to do this. I'm using a longer needle, a doll needle. I'm using a 4-hole button, but you only need to use 2 of the holes, so a 2-hole button is fine. And we're going to begin by going, we want to thread our button on. We're going to come in at the back at about the same place as the mark at the front. So we're going to come through, and then we're going to dive in to the back of our head, and we're going to make a stitch. We're going to dive in. We're going to take a fair bit of that head, but keep it nice and even and centered in the middle of the head. See that there? So we've taken some stuffing, so it's nice and firm, it's going to hold, and we've come straight across. See how we've got that happening there. And then we're going to take our needle and we're going to dive back in the other side, and we're going to make it nice and even. So we're going to go back in, just about there, and we're going to come out at the back, just next to the other one, because our button is going to be threaded there. Sort of need 6 hands doing this, but it all comes together in the end. So you can see that what we've got there, our 2 threads pass through button first, through the body, into the head, across, back into the body, and of course then we've got the 2 threads, and you can test it. You can pull that one back now and you can see, yep, that's where we want our little face to sit. So we've already got one side on our button. So we just come back through the button on the other side. Just make sure you're checking as you go that your threads aren't getting all twisted up. There we go. So we've got our 2 threads coming through, and basically all we need to do now is tie them off. So you can cut your needle off, and it's just a matter of making a knot. I'm pulling that in really firm. I'm then going to squeeze down and keep pulling that button in until it's really firm. Keep squeezing from the front, get that button in as tight as you can, and then knot it off probably about 4 times, and you can lose those thread ends back into the button, into the body if you like, or you can just snip them off. And there he is, our little sleepy kitty. Button on the back. and it's all tied off. And he looks a little uncomfortable, so let's make him a bed. I've chosen a print this time and just a plain felt so that we get a bit of a two-toned effect. So all we have to do is just right sides together. We're just going to pin that one together and sew all around the edge. Leave an opening for turning, probably about 4 centimetres. Machine stitch that all the way around, leave your opening, and then we'll turn it through. So now I've sewn that one up and I've turned it through, just given it a little press, and then I've sewn a tiny little 3 to 4 millimetre top stitch all around the outside, because that's how we're going to close the opening in the end. The filling, perhaps you have plastic beads, plastic pellets. I'm just using rice, just clean white rice, and you don't need very much. It's only to give it a little bit of weight and just to make it a little bit posable. So you can set all your little kitty on it. See, this one's not got much in there, but it's just enough to be able to make a little bit of an indentation there. So just fill that one up just as much as you like, then just turn that, press that little edge under, and then you can continue on with your little top stitching, machine stitch to close that opening. So there we go. Now we've got 2 sleeping kitties. Perfect for an office desk for a friend, and it looks fabulous in a little girl's room. There we go. Well, that was fun. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, you could give this video a thumbs up. That would be beaut. I hope you've got someone special to make this little one for. I certainly have just the place for these two, a couple of little girls who really love them. So in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe. You don't want to miss any of my upcoming projects. You can send me pictures of the little things that you've been making. Just send me via Instagram, simply #payitforward_family, because I'd love to see what you're doing. Thanks for all the comments. Keep them coming. And until next time, remember to pay it forward, because everybody can. And it's hooroo from me.